Excelsior, true believers! You are about to embark upon a journey, a trip to the 70s and 80s when mighty Marvel Comics ruled over all. The Defenders, Doctor Strange, the Champions, Deathlock, the Submariner, the Incredible Hulk, Killraven, the Son of Satan, the Macabre Man-Thing, and all your other Bronze Age favorites every week appearing on Defenders Dialogue. Now here are your guides, Christopher Golden and Brian Keene.
Excelsior, true believers.
Excelsior indeed. Hi, Chris. Good to be back with you.
Brian, I'm excited for the new beginning we have today, mainly because most of the comics we're going to be talking about, I have never read.
That's right. I had never read Black Goliath or The Champions, so when we covered those, it was my first time going through them, and you have never read most of the Man-Thing.
Yeah.
So we'll be doing that now. We mentioned on last week's show that I was very excited to get to Steve Gerber's 39-issue run. But before we do that, we're going to kick things off today a little differently. We're going to start with Savage Tales, issue number 1, and then Astonishing Tales, issues 12 and 13. None of those are Steve Gerber, however, it should be pointed out.
Yeah, they're not Steve Gerber, but I felt, I had picked up the complete Steve Gerber Man-Thing collection. And ironically, even though it's the Man-Thing by Steve Gerber, the complete collection, volume 1, it begins with not Steve Gerber because Steve Gerber didn't create the Man-Thing. The Man-Thing's first appearance was in Savage Tales. And then there was supposed to be a second Man-Thing story, but most of that got incorporated into Astonishing Tales number 12, which weirdly, Brian, will allow us to talk about a character I'm confident is a favorite of yours, even though we've never discussed him, I don't think. And
absolutely.
That is Ka-Zar.
Absolutely. He's every time I get asked to pitch to Marvel, I dust off my Ka-Zar pitch, and every time they say, you can't do this with Ka-Zar. I love Ka-Zar when he's written correctly. Unfortunately, I'm not a fan of the early 70s Bronze Age Ka-Zar. I'm much more a fan of what Bruce Jones did with the character in the 80s, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. And then also when we get there, we'll discuss the initial appearance of a major Marvel character who went through, I would argue, I would say of the characters who've gone through the greatest evolution in Marvel Comics history of the superheroes, Patsy Walker, even though you don't like the Hellcat, you have to admit she's gone through an incredible evolution.
Absolutely she has. And again, for the record, and we said this when we covered Defenders, I like the character when she's written correctly. I thought J.M. DeMatteis did some amazing things with her.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of other writers just focus on the happy-go-lucky part. And it all seems very superficial, and therefore she seems like a superficial character to me.
Yeah. Well, her evolution, and then I also feel like Carol Danvers' evolution, obviously. And I think we're going to find today a third woman of Marvel who had relatively meager beginnings, but went on to a great evolution. So we will get there.
Exactly. But yeah, we begin with Savage Tales number 1, the first appearance of the Macabre Man-Thing, a.k.a. the giant size Man-Thing. We don't need to spend a lot of time on the origin. It's only an 11-page story, but the background, everybody gets credited with creating this character. Supposedly Stan Lee came up with the idea, or he came up with the title and the idea. And then Roy Thomas came up with the actual origin. Okay. But then they got this then young writer, a beginner in comics, Jerry Conway. One of both of our favorites from the era. Now he'd done a handful of science fiction novels, couple short stories at the time. I think his sci-fi publisher was the same one that was publishing F. Paul Wilson and Tom Monteleone, around that time.
Right.
So he got the job of actually scripting the comic. And the other things in this issue were Conan, Ka-Zar, and then Joshua, a.k.a. Black Brother, which I don't know if Marvel ever did anything with again. And a series called The Sisterhood, which was interesting. It was set in the 23rd century, and it was what if feminists had won the war, basically, is the premise, which was all Stan Lee, and is full of his hyperbole in the writing. But The Sisterhood was a real interesting concept that unfortunately Marvel's just never kind of revisited.
Yeah, I've never read that, so I'll have to hunt that down. Again, I'm only reading the 11 pages of Man-Thing that are in this issue of Savage Tales. And by the way, not to be confused by the 5 people who read it with the 3-issue miniseries, The Sisterhood, that Thomas Nagosky and I did a number of years ago.
Right.
Just about exorcist nuns.
Right. Yeah, I had a Post-it note here to ask you about that.
Yeah, nothing to do with that, The Sisterhood.
So the third story in Savage Tales is, of course, the very first appearance of the Man-Thing.
Well, and I just want to interrupt you for a second, Brian, and just say, for people who are unfamiliar with the Marvel full-size black and white magazines of this era, if you've not read them in collections or anything like that, you are missing not only some of the great stories, but some of the greatest art Marvel Comics ever published.
Absolutely.
As evidenced here by the 11 pages drawn by Gray Morrow. Holy shit! What a beginning for the Man-Thing with this art.
Agreed. It's just breathtaking to look at. I'll be honest. I skimmed the story because I've read this issue of Savage Tales #1 multiple times. I know it by heart. But just in prepping for the show, in looking at the art again, it really is art. It's not comic book illustration. It's legit art. Like it should be hanging in a gallery somewhere.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Steve Gerber, of course, is not here to interview. But next time we have Scott Edelman on the show, I want to ask Scott, as we said, to the best of my research, this is the first comic that Jerry Conway wrote. And, the prose here very much sets a tone that will be followed in Man-Thing by Steve Gerber, by Chris Claremont, by J.M. DeMatteis, not so much R.L. Stine, but all the great writers that have done Man-Thing. I don't want to call it purple prose because it's not. It's very lyrical. It's very literary, but it's a literary comic book. And I want to ask Edelman if Gerber did that on purpose, if he decided to. Gerber's always been very literary. His stuff on the Defenders that we've covered was, but Man-Thing particularly so. And I'm wondering if he was just following Jerry Conway's lead in that regard.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's certainly, I agree that the tone, the sort of poetic tone that struck at the very beginning, is certainly carried forward in the issues that I know I did read. But we begin with, we'll go through this quickly, but we begin with the swamp, of course, is the Everglades in Florida. Later on, we'll learn that this is the nexus of all realities. But for now, all we know is that the Man-Thing lives in the swamp, or the Everglades. And there's a bird, a tropical bird who's then eaten by an alligator, and the alligator is then attacked by the Man-Thing. And we're showing the and then there's a classic Kong moment. This is definitely the page you're going to have to share, Brian. The splash page of Man-Thing fighting this big alligator. It's just gorgeous.
Agreed.
I mean, these 11 pages are some of the most beautiful monster art in the history of Marvel. I think it's just stunning.
Yep. And we should point out the alligator is, in fact, the Man-Thing's number one arch nemesis. He fights more alligators throughout his history at Marvel than he does anyone else.
Yep. Well, so the thing is that basically the Man-Thing is stumbling through the swamp. He feels weak. He needs food. He needs drink. He doesn't know what he is. All he knows is that he's naked and alone in the swamp.
And his memories are fading.
Right. So he doesn't know, he's trying to remember how he got here, what he is. And then we cut away to one of those memories, Brian.
Yeah. We find out.
I want to say, by the way, also that, in these days, as a young man reading these black and white Marvel magazines, I was always properly titillated by the flashes of nudity or near nudity that the black and white magazines afforded.
That's right. Because we see scientist Ted Sallis and his girlfriend Ellen, and Ellen is dressed in negligee, and they are in a secret location in the swamp where we find out Ted is trying to recreate the super soldier formula that once gave Steve Rogers his powers and turned him into Captain America. Yeah. He has one batch of the formula, and he's waiting for his handler, a mysterious man named Hamilton, to show up and get it.
He's so worried about it falling into the wrong hands that he's destroyed. All of his notes have been burned. He's destroyed everything. The only thing he still has is one dose of the thing that he thinks is actually the final version of this thing, which combines the DNA from various animals and all this stuff. And in his head, he has the formula.
That's right.
So it only exists in his head and in this one syringe.
That's right. So Ellen convinces him they should go look for Hamilton. So they hop on a pontoon boat, fan boat, and they go heading out through the swamp. And when they get to Hamilton's house, they find these two mysterious bad guys in there. Now, I'm just going to spoil it for everybody. These guys work for AIM, Advanced Idea Mechanics. We've talked about them on the show many times. For our Marvel Cinematic listeners, you'll remember them from Iron Man 3. It turns out
comics in this era, they always wore yellow suits that made them look like they were beekeepers.
Yep, exactly. Turns out that Ellen is also working for AIM.
Yeah, she has been spying on Ted the whole time, watching him and making sure that she can deliver him when the time comes.
That's right.
But Ted is a little bit more capable than we were led to believe than the typical scientist in these old stories. And he fights back. And he escapes.
That's right. And as he's fleeing in the car and he's being pursued, he injects himself with the only soul sample of the serum. And then this changes continuity-wise. Either he deliberately crashes the car into the swamp, or he's so busy injecting himself that he accidentally crashes the car in the swamp. But either way, the car goes off the road into the swamp. And when the AIM guys and Ellen show up, they think he's dead because the swamp itself is bottomless.
Indeed. They think he's dead. The swamp itself is bottomless. But we know that what has happened is the combination of the formula interacting with Ted's system and Ted's wounds from the crash and the all of the algae and other things, not out, that's right, but anyway, in the swamp, turn Ted Sallis into the macabre man thing.
That's right. He then emerges in classic movie monster fashion onto the road, confronts the car with the two AIM bad guys and Ellen, just flat out fucking murders the bad guys, because the Marvel black and white comics, you could actually get away with things like that.
Right, exactly.
Just breaks their backs, rips them apart. Then he turns on Ellen.
And then we have the establishment of what I think is what I always thought was the coolest thing about Man-Thing.
That's right. Because here's the thing about Man-Thing. The tagline is, whatever knows fear burns at the Man-Thing's touch. Now, we'll find out why later. But yes, if you're feeling fear, okay, if that's the emotion that you're giving off and he touches you, you will burst into flame. And that's what happens to Ellen. He touches her face. He hesitates, even though he's beginning to lose his memories. He remembers her, and he touches her face gently, and her skin just burns. So he leaves her there.
Yeah.
With her face all blistered, and returns to the swamp.
Now, when he does that, Brian, he then goes to the swamp and he kneels and looks into his own reflection in the water, trying to figure out who he is and what he is. He doesn't know he's Ted Sallis, but he has a variety of memories that are lingering there. And now, a tangent.
Yep. Sorry about that, Chris. Usually you're the one that leaves his phone unmuted. Today it was me.
Oh, no, I didn't even hear that because I'm so focused on introducing my tangent, which is that last night, Connie and I watched Ralph Breaks the Internet, which I had not seen yet. Have you seen this cinematic masterpiece?
It is delightful.
And all I could think when I got to this image of the Man-Thing kneeling, looking at his own reflection, is the setup in Ralph Breaks the Internet where Vanellope meets all of the other all of the Disney princesses.
Yeah.
And they have a girls' night and they're bonding. And she's trying to figure out what her dream is, trying to figure out what she's meant to do. And their advice to her is to look into a pool of important water. And then lights will come up and she will begin to sing about what her dream is, like what her purpose is. And then she'll know. And I saw this and I thought, the Man-Thing is now going to burst into song about his purpose in life. But alas, that did not happen. But maybe now that Disney owns Man-Thing, the next time we see Man-Thing in cinema or television, maybe he will be a Disney princess and he will burst into song and we'll get that whole bit.
I want to write that so bad.
All right, Astonishing Tales with Ka-Zar, Lord of the Hidden Jungle, number 12.
That's right. Now, up until this point, Astonishing Tales was a co-star book. Every issue was Dr. Doom, our old pal Dr. Doom, and Ka-Zar. Eventually, the Dr. Doom series ended, and Ka-Zar just took over the whole book. Now, we're not going to go back and do all those issues leading up to this. Basically, what you need to know about Ka-Zar, he's Marvel's Tarzan. He's a rich boy who got abandoned in the jungle, but not just any jungle. He's a denizen of the Savage Land, which is a tropical jungle in the heart of Antarctica that is inhabited by dinosaurs and all kinds of non-human races. And eventually we'll find out that the Savage Land was actually a sort of Disneyland resort built by the Atlanteans.
But I didn't know that.
Yeah. But that's not until the 80s.
Love it.
But yeah, so and the other thing you need to know about Ka-Zar, his sidekick is a saber-toothed tiger named Zabu.
Well, and again, knowing you, Brian, knowing me, as much as we liked Ka-Zar, and as great that he was Lord of the Jungle like Tarzan, great that he was in the Savage Land, which was in the middle of Antarctica, which when I was reading these stories when I was a kid, to me, it was like, oh, that's really cool because it reminded me of Doc Savage. That was great. Great that he had an absolutely stunningly gorgeous girlfriend later, his wife, who was in her own right a queen of the jungle. But the most interesting and most exciting thing about Ka-Zar was always Zabu.
Oh, yeah. My first cat was named Zabu when I was 9 years old. And, you were right. You called it. Ka-Zar is one of my favorite Marvel characters when he's written correctly.
Yep.
And it's the one pitch I keep coming back to with Marvel, and it's the one pitch that I just can never seem to sell them, no matter which editor I'm talking to.
Maybe you should just do a book about Zabu.
Maybe we should. Do you want to hear my Ka-Zar pitch? Do we have
Yes, please do. Okay. Indulge us, Brian.
In a nutshell, later on in Marvel, in the 80s, Bruce Jones has Ka-Zar and Shauna and Zabu living in the Savage Land and trying to raise a child. And my pitch to Marvel is, what parent is going to raise their child in a dinosaur-infested jungle? So they move to Paramus, New Jersey, where Shauna gets a job as a very successful commercial real estate salesperson. She's out selling shopping malls every day and stuff. And Ka-Zar has no skills. His only skills is fighting dinosaurs. So he's unemployed and he's sitting on the couch and he's getting a beer belly. His hairline's receding. He's kind of like Thor in Avengers Endgame. And his kid's getting bullied at school. And the whole miniseries was just, Ka-Zar confronting his own toxic masculinity, teaching his son how to defend himself, but also learning how to better himself. And then there was a whole subplot the whole time with Zabu and the poodle next door and the lady from the housing authority who doesn't like Zabu. And for some reason, Marvel just does not think that people would want to read this. They're like, well, who's the villain? Well, there is no villain.
The villain is toxic masculinity.
Yeah, the villain's his receding hairline. Maybe the poodle.
Well, look, I want to read this, and I suspect that most of our listeners would like to read that too.
Yeah, listeners. When people ask me about this, I tell them they want to read it. Keith Giffen desperately wants to illustrate it. But I can't get anybody at Marvel to take it seriously. I pitch them this, and then they say, "Okay, well, what else do you got?" So I don't know. One of these days,
Ka-Zar, Lord of the Couch. You can use that line. You have my permission.
Okay. We open with an airport in Miami International, where they're offloading cargo from an airplane, and one of that bits of cargo is a cage, which holds a very pissed off saber-toothed tiger.
That was always the best part. I'm sorry, I keep coming back to it, but Zabu is my favorite character. Anyway, so the employees go running as Zabu breaks out of his cage, and then we get back in the States at last from a character who is called Barbara Morse, who we'll discuss in a minute.
Yeah.
And she and this guy, I can't see his name, Brian. Basically, they're Ka-Zar's handlers. They have brought him from the Savage Land to the United States for a specific purpose. But before they can get to that purpose, he has to subdue his best friend. Like many pets, Zabu has not enjoyed his flight.
No, he is not.
Yeah.
So, the cop is getting ready to shoot Zabu. And Ka-Zar subdues him. And then the cops are like, all right, let's arrest you. Ka-Zar, gets into it with the cops, and Paul is the other guy. Paul and Barbara get him out of the situation, and the four of them flee the airport together.
Yes.
Basically.
And then they reveal the fact that they believe that Ellen, Ted Salas's girlfriend, was a member of AIM, and Ted Salas has gone missing in the Everglades, and they've brought Ka-Zar all the way from the Savage Land in order for him, the greatest sort of tracker of all time, or what have you.
Yep.
He and Zabu are supposed to try to find Ted Salas. Now, let me take a moment with a much more pertinent tangent, which is to get back to what I mentioned earlier. Although this is not her first appearance, I assume her first appearance was in earlier issues of Astonishing Tales in the Ka-Zar story.
Correct.
Maybe the immediate previous one, or maybe this is her first one, I'm not sure. But Barbara Morse, a.k.a. Bobby Morse, is also eventually going to become Mockingbird of the West Coast Avengers, and later of numerous other superhero stories. and one of the major characters in the television series Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah.
And now I think recently she's been showing up. I think she's been Peter Parker and Mockingbird, or Spider-Man and Mockingbird have been dating, I think.
Oh, really?
In current comics. I'm not sure about that. But great character, actually. Always really liked her. And I did not know until reading this that this was where she came from.
Yep, absolutely. Her first appearance is the issue before this.
Yep.
And it should be noted, she's not in costume. She's not a superhero at this point. She's just a secret government agent.
Right.
But she's still pretty badass, as we're going to find.
Oh, she's definitely badass, but it's just that idea that I love when we see these characters who are brought in, in one fashion, and they're not really characters of consequence.
Yep.
And over time, you can track them and show how they become major characters.
Yep.
So I love that stuff.
So they've brought Ka-Zar and Zabu from the Savage Land to the Florida Everglades, and they want Ka-Zar to track down Ted Sallis.
Right.
They reveal that they found Barbara with her face horribly scarred and her mind gone. But it turns out that they're not the only ones looking.
You mean Ellen? They found Ellen.
Or Ellen, I mean, yeah. They're not the only ones looking for Ted Sallis. AIM, complete and beekeeper outfits are also in the Everglades, looking for him. And they immediately shoot down the helicopter carrying our heroes.
Yeah, sweating their asses off inside those beekeeper costumes. By the way, we should also mention that this issue is written by Roy Thomas, drawn by John Buscema, and with inks by Dan Adkins. And I again, it's not the black and white gray Morrow stuff, but Buscema and Adkins do a beautiful job as well in this. The helicopter shot down. Our heroes escape underwater in the Everglades, including an image of Zabu swimming underwater, which I loved.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Brian, what is the threat they face?
The Man-Thing's arch enemy, alligators, but not just one, a whole horde of alligators, which Ka-Zar and Zabu make quick work of. And there's a great panel Buscema draws here of Zabu fighting 3 alligators and just pardon the term, but just bitch slapping.
Yeah, that was the panel I was going to point out as well. Loved it. It's worth this issue just to see that panel.
Yeah.
So yes, Paul Allen and Bobby Morse, Dr. Barbara Morse. So Paul and Ka-Zar and Zabu and Barbara managed to get her to a couple of doctors, Dr. Wendell, and they're missing a woman named Dr. Calvin.
That's right.
And Dr. Calvin is unconscious. I'm sorry. She's regained consciousness. But we don't know exactly what has happened to her yet.
That's right. She just emerges only long enough to murmur Ted Sallis's name or the single word Man-Thing. Yeah. And with that ominous note, we transition outside the government complex, where we see the Man-Thing himself looking inside. And again, the captions tell us that, he's continuing to lose his memory. They're fading. And then we get this transition, as you mentioned earlier in the show, what was supposed to appear in Savage Tales #2. But it appears here in Astonishing Tales instead. And what's interesting about this, it was done for the black and white magazine. They color it with this yellow tint, which is real interesting.
Yeah, in order to have it not appear just in black and white,
right?
They use this yellow tint to it because it's a flashback, which is fine. But there we learn more about what has happened about Dr. Calvin. How she, she was wandering. What's interesting too is it says as graphically portrayed in Savage Tales #1, but that's not what happened.
Well, I think that's referring. I think they put the caption box in the wrong place. I think it's referring to the recap of his origin.
Right. Oh, so what we get here is essentially there is a guy who is portraying himself or presenting himself as an Everglades sort of hillbilly rabble rouser who's talking about the Man-Thing and all this other stuff. But he claims that Dr. Calvin is a witch woman.
That's right.
She lives in this shack in the swamp, and she's doing all kinds of witchery. But we will find out momentarily, is also an agent of AIM, and he is whipping up a frenzy amongst the locals against the quote-unquote witch woman.
Yep.
Because he knows that it's Dr. Calvin, and secretly inside that swamp home, they are doing experiments, and they're trying to figure out what Ted Sallis was doing. They're trying to recreate his formula. So that's what's happening there.
So yeah, he shows up, he captures Bobby, he's holding her hostage. He's trying to get the mob to kill Dr. Calvin. But before that can happen, the Man-Thing shows up.
Of course.
And he's attracted by their emotions, the anger, the violence that's similar.
And also, I will say too that because this was supposed to appear in Savage Tales #2, we do get a moment that I almost missed that would only happen in those black and white magazines, and they snuck in here, which is that when the Man-Thing is fighting these guys, he smashes one guy in the face so hard that the guy's head snaps back with such ferocity that his neck snaps, his neck breaks.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of thing you normally wouldn't get in a typical Marvel comic of the era. But of course, we're disgusting, and we thought that was great.
That's right. So Dr. Calvin, she goes up to the Man-Thing, and Bobby's like, wait, what are you doing? That thing will kill you. And she's like, no, he won't harm me. He needs help. She says, in some strange way, I feel I know you, as if we've met before. There's a man under that stagnant pile of muck and moss. I know there is. Dr. Calvin believes that Ted Sallis may in fact be the Man-Thing. But before she can confirm that, Chris, what happens?
She is shot in the back. That is how she ended up unconscious inside there, which is where we left her off before this flashback. And then the Man-Thing, we see that he's outside the window, and there's nothing he can do about this. He realizes. So once this memory is passed through his head, he's turning to go, Brian. But unfortunately, someone hears his departing step.
That's right. Ka-Zar and Zabu both hear it. And Ka-Zar tells Zabu, you can't go running around in the jungle. You have to stay here. Ties him up and goes off in pursuit of the Man-Thing.
Yeah, I think he's worried about Ka-Zar falling into quicksand. I mean, Zabu falling into quicksand.
So, AIM, as we said, they're also looking for Ted Sallis. They've decided. Now, here's the thing. Advanced idea mechanics. They've created MODOK. They've created a cosmic cube. They had a laser cannon that shot down the helicopter earlier in the issue. How do they capture Man-Thing?
They dig a pit.
They dig a pit and cover it with sticks and dirt, and he falls down inside.
But it works.
It does work. But Ka-Zar shows up as well.
Sometimes, Brian, digging a pit is the answer to your problems.
You know what? Digging the pit would be the answer to a lot of my problems.
Anyway, Ka-Zar comes. He beats the shit out of the AIM guys. One of the AIM guys falls into the pit, and the Man-Thing grabs him, and he burns, of course.
Yep.
But the AIM guys, one guy gets the better of Ka-Zar, smashes him in the back of the head with a gun, and Ka-Zar falls into the pit with the Man-Thing. And we end with a moment that, again, this is geek conversation. All I could think about was Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi. I can't think of the name of the monster, but whatever.
The Sarlacc.
No, the Sarlacc. No,
yeah, you're right. It wasn't the Sarlacc. I don't know.
And that's the end. It's Ka-Zar versus the Man-Thing. Now, as we move on to Astonishing Tales 13, I just want to point out, Brian, that is it just me, or does the Man-Thing eventually change his appearance dramatically? Because initially, in these initial appearances, in order to show the mishmash of various elements that went into his creation, he's drawn so that, he has sort of like clawed feet. He has big sort of clawed hands like a Sasquatch or something. He's got fur. His skin is sort of gray or brown. And then his face is that sort of reptilian thing that we're familiar with.
Right.
So it changes over time, right?
It does. And they do explain it over time. He, basically the super soldier formula is constantly regenerating his body.
I see.
And it regenerates based on what he's around.
I gotcha.
So different plant life, different animal life, different looking Man-Thing.
Okay. I gotcha. That makes sense. All right. So issue 13, Roy Thomas again writing, John Buscema, but this time Rich Buckler on inks.
Yep. One of my favorites.
Sorry, no, that's wrong. Buscema and Buckler are both penciling. Dan Adkins is still on inks.
Right. Right. And we open up again in the pit. Ka-Zar, a man who has single-handedly fought Tyrannosaurus Rexes, is feeling fear. And again, we are told that the Man-Thing cannot handle that emotion. That emotion causes him physical pain, and he must reach out and destroy it.
There you go. So he's not trying to destroy Ka-Zar necessarily.
Right.
But he's hurt by the presence of the fear that Ka-Zar feels. It's the law of diminishing returns here, I think. But in any case, there are 3 pages of recap, and then the fight begins. Ka-Zar manages to continue to get away from him, but Ka-Zar does have a moment where his fear vanishes, Brian.
That's right. That's right. Now he's
vital.
Pissed off.
Yeah. His anger overcomes his fear, and then he's very, bravely, courageously willing to fight the Man-Thing.
Yep.
Because of that, when the Man-Thing lifts him up over his head, Ka-Zar does not burn.
That's right. But the Man-Thing uses him as a weapon against the AIM. He tries to bludgeon the AIM goons with Ka-Zar. And we find out that the AIM guys actually want Ka-Zar alive for some reason.
Yeah. And then they blast the Man-Thing with some kind of laser cannon weapon. Right. So he's down for the count for the moment, and they've got their guns trained on Ka-Zar. And so Ka-Zar and Man-Thing are momentarily helpless, Brian, which leads the way for the true hero of this story.
Da-da-da! Zabu, with the rope that Ka-Zar tied him up with, snapped and dangling from his huge neck. A living, lunging nightmare from the dawn of time, the saber-fanged fury called Zabu.
Exactly. And you know what? To me, that's the comic. It's like, I want to do a comic called The Great Zabu, Tiger of Zero Fucks.
And Zabu just lays into the AIM goons. Again, we see just, one mighty swipe of his paw and they go flying and they're scattered. They can't stop them.
They just fought the Man-Thing and Ka-Zar, but now, appropriately, when Zabu enters the fray, they run away.
That's exactly what they do. But then
they're literally one of them is literally yelling, "Don't talk, run!"
But then Bobby and Paul and one of their helpers show up, and Zabu turns on them, and Ka-Zar's like, "Now calm down, kitty."
They're friends.
Yep. And then he goes to check on the Man-Thing, who's lying motionless in the bottom of the pit.
Yep. And I loved this too, because speaking of the toxic masculinity of Ka-Zar, I'm just going to sum up these 2 pages.
Okay.
The Man-Thing is so heavy that they can't lift him up out of the pit. They wrap a rope around him, and 5 guys are trying to hoist him out of the pit with this rope, and it's not working. So Ka-Zar, they turn to ask Ka-Zar for his help. And instead of saying, no problem, guys, I'm happy to lend a hand, Ka-Zar basically says, get out of my way. I'm going to do this by myself. So instead of joining in, Ka-Zar's like, I will prove the size of my penis to you by lifting the Man-Thing on my own.
And then he taunts him. He says, no other man is Ka-Zar.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like, oh my God. There are 5 other guys standing there who could help you, Ka-Zar. Like, you could have just lent a hand and it would have been done already. Anyway. They put Man-Thing on a wagon, and they bring him back, and they cage him at the location that is what on the outside looks like a swamp house, but on the inside is actually the lab where Salas was working, where Dr. Calvin was working. And now
Dr. Wendell emerges, and he's been shot, and he informs them as he's dying that AIM showed up and they captured Dr. Calvin. And we don't know what's happened to Dr. Allen because he dies before he can tell them.
Yeah. And then these 2 guys come in and they reveal that our jackass, who we said was an AIM agent trying to, rouse the people in the area to turn against Dr. Calvin, he's denying that he's working for AIM. He says, no, I just wanted to go after her because I thought she was a witch. I shot her because I thought she was a witch. And he's denying it completely. Yep. But Ka-Zar is not having it. He's not afraid of Ka-Zar, though, Brian. He's afraid of the great Zabu, the tiger of zero fucks.
Yep. Now, you think about how many noir movies and action movies and comics and novels where the hero holds, or the anti-hero, holds a gun to someone's head while they're interrogating them. Ka-Zar needs no gun because Ka-Zar has a saber-toothed tiger.
Exactly.
That he literally holds to this guy's head.
This is what we need, Brian. We need saber-toothed tigers.
We do.
I feel this in my bones.
Yep. And so, this guy confesses everything. And, Ka-Zar says, okay, go put him back in prison. But meanwhile, nobody's paying attention to the Man-Thing. And what he does is because he's made of mud and ooze and vines and plankton and algae, he just oozes through the bars of the cage.
Yeah, there you go. Because, we are still defining what Man-Thing is, and I think this is appropriate. We're laying the groundwork for many stories that will come in the future.
That's right.
So basically then, Barbara Morse says, Lord, how I hate the glades. She and Zabu and Ka-Zar are going off searching for AIM. She says, I'll be glad when we found Dr. Calvin and Paul too, of course. And Ka-Zar says, you do not seem eager to find your man. And she says, oh, I'm eager, all right. And I think that's meant to be that she's mad at Paul. And Ka-Zar says, the female animal is ever a mystery to Ka-Zar. Yep. There's a reason why you swing around the jungle in the savage land. You stinky bastard. Because he smells.
Oh, you guarantee he smells.
He has a manly musk.
What was it from last week? The Red Skull,
Exactly.
the aromatic Aryan sweat or something that he said in Supervillain Team Up.
Yeah.
So anyway, Bobby, aka Mockingbird in the future, and Ka-Zar and Zabu, they find the AIM base, and Ka-Zar and Zabu just launch a full frontal assault.
Yeah. And it's great. And again, we have more pages. And again, I hope you'll share that page or that panel where Zabu has grabbed an AIM agent by the seat of his pants and is swinging him through the air with his teeth.
Oh, absolutely.
And then snaps his head back and hurls the AIM agent across the jungle into some trees. That whole page needs to be shared because really this whole episode is about Zabu.
Exactly.
The glory that is Zabu.
They get inside the base. More fighting ensues, and Bobby, meanwhile, finds Dr. Calvin still in a coma, and then she finds Paul. But here we get the heartbreak of the issue, Chris.
Well, in traditional Bronze Age Marvel fashion, the guy who is the love interest of our female hero turns out to be a double agent, a turncoat. He's actually a member of AIM. He betrays her. He's holding her at gunpoint to keep Ka-Zar and Zabu away from him. And he plans to kill Dr. Calvin. But then there's a gigantic crash, Brian.
That's right. And the Man-Thing smashes through the wall. Paul fires at him, but that's
and
like
Paul
firing.
Is terrified.
Yeah, he fires his gun at him, but that's like firing into mud. Nothing happens.
Yeah. Well, nothing happens. The Man-Thing grabs Paul by the face, and the Man-Thing special, and he burns. Ka-Zar's trying to save him, even though he doesn't really deserve to be saved. Man-Thing swats Ka-Zar away and points toward the exit. Basically, you and Bobby Morse take Dr. Calvin and get out of here. But of course, I'm interpreting that from the that the Man-Thing says.
So Ka-Zar listens to him, grabs Dr. Calvin, and Bobby, Ka-Zar, Dr. Calvin, and Zabu flee as the Man-Thing, perhaps with his last conscious memory, pulls the doomsday switch that every good secret base has.
I love that too. It's like the only disappointment for me is it isn't just a button. It isn't just a big red button. But it is a red switch. And he throws the switch and the whole thing explodes in the swamp.
Yep. And we then
Ka-Zar holding the unconscious Dr. Calvin with Bobby next to him.
That's right. And we then get the final twist of the issue when Bobby reveals she's actually a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent and she never loved Paul. S.H.I.E.L.D. told her to pretend that she loved Paul.
Right. So when she said when she had that sarcasm, she was talking about she couldn't wait to find him. That was the reason why. Now, of course, the implication here is that the Man-Thing is dead. But of course, we know that that's not the case.
That's right.
Because next episode, adventure into fear with Man-Thing.
That's right. And I cannot wait to go over these. Some of my favorite Bronze Age Marvel comics.
Yeah. We say, and I will say that the artists who team up in the next issue, it's written by Jerry Conway, Adventure into Fear number 10.
Yeah.
And drawn by Gray Morrow and Howard Chaykin. So we're back with Gray Morrow. I would just say that I'm enthusiastic, Brian. I'm ready now. I'm totally on board for this adventure.
And just a reminder to any of our listeners who fly the banner of I don't want politics in my comics, get used to it. Because it's the 1970s and Steve Gerber is writing and he's going to inject a fuck ton, an actual measurement, a fuck ton of politics and social commentary into this monster comic book.
Well, those people who don't like that, at least they had this episode of Defenders Dialogue.
That's right.
We had no politics in this episode.
Just saber-toothed tigers.
Just saber-toothed tigers. I just want to say that I wish that Zabu would eat Kanye West.
Well, I will give a hearty Excelsior to that idea.
All right. I'll see you next week, my friend.
All right, brother.
Excelsior, true believers.
See you next week, folks.
Defenders Dialogue is a production of the Brian Keene Radio Network. You can listen to this episode and all previous episodes for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play Music, and wherever else podcasts are available. Defenders Dialogue is written and produced by Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Our theme music is by Xander Harris. Our engineer is Matt Wilderson. Check out his books on Amazon.com. If you enjoyed this show, you might enjoy our other podcasts, The Horror Show with Brian Keene, Cosmic Shenanigans, and Grindcast. To advertise on Defenders Dialogue, visit briankeene.com and click Podcasts.